For 3 million years, the human race has been at the top of the evolutionary ladder. Nothing lasts forever. Here's your relook. At the ThreeZero, this is the species Sill 1/6 scale collectible figure. The Sill collectible figure features an original body uniquely crafted to replicate the alien character seen in the 1995 film. A soft translucent PVC was used on the torso, arms, and legs, and Sill features a textured interior skeleton. Sill was a figure I felt long overdue a re-review of, simply because I wasn't happy with the first video that I did. Changed around and started experimenting with some lighting to lesser satisfying results. We're going to do things right this time, and like I said, we're going to re-review this figure. Before we do that, though, I'm going to take the tape measure right to the very top of not her head necessarily, but to the back of her hair. I'm going to stop it right there. According to my trusty tape measure, and let's just see if we stop that in the right place. There we go. According to my tape measure, she's rather tall, actually. The figure stands 13.5, or 13.5 inches in height. And that, in centimeters, works out that the figure is 34.4, so almost 34.5 centimeters tall. As impressive as the figure may be, sadly, she doesn't come with much in the way of accessories. Basically, what you're seeing right now is the fullest extent of all the things that come included with the figure. So she pretty much just comes with a display stand. And that's really it. Let's have a look at the stand that comes included with Sill, and the stand itself is one of a talking point. I'm not really happy, I have to admit, with the style of stand that they ended up going with. For starters, the material feels almost like it's not quite pewter, but it definitely has more of a stone feel to it than your traditional plastic stands. And while I will admit the texturing is done nicely onto the surface of it, I'm just overall disappointed by firstly how thick it is. And secondly, the fact that the stand itself, the top of it, gives very little of a flat surface for the figure to stand on. Sill has difficulties standing. Thank goodness she actually does have some little support struts for her heels that we'll talk about in a second. But you already have a figure that has difficulty standing. And then add on to that, you get a very textured stand like that, with very little flat surfaces to it. Well, you're simply just asking for trouble. The other thing about the stand is because it is so thick, it takes a figure that is already much taller than some of your other horror 6-scale figures and increases the height even still further than that. So usually when it comes to displaying the figure, I just sort of cross my fingers and hope that she's going to stand fine on her own. And I tend not to use this stand really at all. The species down below simply just looks like it's been painted in place. I mean, the stand I'm going to give the credit to is nicely detailed, but it really doesn't help with a figure that already, like I said, has difficulty standing. Attaching to that to sort of aid in supporting the figure, you get this sort of translucent, almost a very, kind of is the color of something if you are a smoker. You pick up a collectible or something from a toy show and you always know that someone has been smoking in the house that they're selling the toy from, because it has this off-stained color. Kind of looks like the color of that, or the color of iced tea. How's that for a comparison? It is translucent plastic. It does have, of course, the ratcheted joint down below, so it sort of helps to hold things in place. This section, the mid-knuckle, if you will, of the adjustable neck is also ratcheted, so at least that does aid to hold the figure in place. It's a very narrow, very small gripped waist clip as well that just barely fits around her waist. I feel like while, again, there's a lot of good elements that I like on this particular figure, the display stand, truthfully, is not one of my favorite things that comes included with the figure, and sadly, it's also the only thing that comes included with the figure. I suppose that's not necessarily correct, because one of the other things that comes included with Sill, will spin her around. She comes with these supporting struts for the backs of her heels. These are magnetized and they'll actually attach via the magnets on the undersides of her heel. When you are putting them in, and certainly when you are removing them, be careful. The thing that you definitely don't want to have happen is the breaking of these little back heel sections for her high-heeled feet. They are thin very clear plastic using that same sort of tinted brown plastic. And because they are clear plastic, they're definitely going to be breaking, so you want to be careful of those. But you basically get two of these. You'll have a section on the front that has like an open slot, little canal area, and then that fits just into her heel. When you are putting it in though, I find it actually is helpful to put it in on a side. Again, you want to be careful that you don't clip. See the back of the heel there. And because it's magnetized, it's going to stay in place. It's not even so much an eyesore either. Truthfully, you're probably not even going to see it because you're going to be looking at the figure from the front. It hides it well enough if you're disappointed by the fact that this is, of course not visible. You can't see that it's, it's empty. I guess they could have come out with clear versions of those as well, so they weren't jet black. But again, it doesn't bother me too much. The hardest issue, again, is just putting them in place. And again, if you just put them in on an angle like this, you can kind of clear both the back of the heel and then attach it to the front of the feet. There you can see right there, there's the little clips that fit basically into those open slots. Treated as well, you'll be seeing the ThreeZero logo on the underside of Sill's one foot. Warnings aside, though, let's certainly have a look at the head sculpt. Designed by, of course, the late H.R. Giger, the same artist, of course, responsible for the design of the xenomorph from the classic Alien film. You definitely see a lot of Giger's influence on the design of Sill. One thing that also seems a bit the influence, and I'm sure it was deliberate, was the fact that if you look at the way the hair is designed, certainly from a side portrait, I can't help but I feel like I'm getting the vibe of Bride of Frankenstein, and I'm sure there's got to be a design. There was reasoning behind that, the way that they designed it. It definitely does look a lot like Bride of Frankenstein. Of course, mind you, Bride of Frankenstein didn't necessarily look like this, not Alien certainly like. But one thing that's neat about it is because most of all the body is done in translucent plastic, it does wonders when you can get actually light running through it. As it stands right now, I've got a light source actually coming from, of course, the top of my studio. So because of that, it actually looks like the hair's on fire, glowing inside. And I assure you, there is no batteries lighting up this figure. That's solely, again, the light working behind the scenes. The face sculpt is really quite good. You can't quite fully make out everything that's going on, because it's using all the same plastic. They have tried to at least shade some of the areas, like for example her eyelids, the areas around her mouth. It seems like they've actually gone in there and dry brushed a black paint, so at least the details like on her lips stand out. You can also see the interior of her mouth with some visible teeth there as well. Part of me actually would have hoped that the figure could have come with two head sculpts, being the fact that she doesn't actually have anything else. And while I certainly don't expect a Natasha Henstridge head sculpt, because that would be ridiculous, but I would certainly have loved to see an alternate head sculpt, or maybe even a face plate that could have popped off the front of the head, where you would have got a face feature with the mouth closed. I mean, it's fine to have the head sculpt with the mouth always permanently open, but I think I would have also liked a face plate that you could have popped off, replaced back on, that would have also had a closed mouth as well. Again, for the fact that this is all utilizing the same styling of plastic, it is such a fantastic looking head sculpt. It's, again, really difficult to kind of place and make out those eyes, because especially the eyes themselves are done in an orange color. It actually kind of just appears like the eyes blend into the rest of the eyeballs. They're still there. You can probably make it out even here on the camera. But again, just really a lot of cool stuff going on with Sill. Fragile elements, yes, we certainly can't overlook that. But it's definitely a superior head sculpt. And I'm so glad that ThreeZero decided to design this and release it. So let's talk about her body. This is one thing that does concern me about the figure. And knock on wood, I haven't had any issues with this yet. I don't know if you can actually make it out, but she does have underneath this layer of pliable plastic, she does actually have a sculpted kind of skeletal frame underneath all of that. I mean, if you kind of look at it, the way that it's banded on the plastic inside, it actually kind of comes across almost like an abdomen of like a cockroach, for example, especially the way that you kind of see the bands running along the back here. As I said, though, underneath this is the skeletal body. Over top of it is this softer plastic, and it covers everything. It covers basically from her shoulders all the way down to her wrists. It covers completely encapsulates her legs inside of this plastic, very soft kind of vinyl plastic that's underneath all of this. If you put your finger to it, you can actually even feel the separate sections of kind of like an accordion style leg structure underneath all of that. You can kind of see it. See, there's like these little kind of lips that stick up from the rest of her bone. It's clever, again, the way they've done that. My biggest concern, though, is areas around the joints. While I don't think here necessarily would be an issue, nor do I feel here would be necessarily an issue, where my greater concern comes is things like elbow bends, for example, or knee bends. The plastic seems forgiving enough right now, but long term, if you are certainly storing this figure and displaying it in a hotter, more humid environment, I feel, especially if you have the legs and the elbows always on a bend, I feel you may start developing stress and split lines starting to form around those joints. I mean, it's nice. It's neat the fact that you have that seamless body working. But, of course, the long term is the thing that I'm most concerned about. I mean, like I said, this plastic is everywhere. It's not necessarily here on the lower torso. It's here in this section just before you hit the waist. This is denser plastic. But then the legs themselves have that continuation. Again, it is something that I've considered so far. I haven't had any issues with the figure on my display, but it's certainly something to consider where you are going to be displaying this figure, should you be wishing to pick this one up for yourself. With that being said, let's have a look at the figure's articulation. Her head at least isn't limited, because the way the head is attached to the top of her neck, it's just by a ball joint. You get still the full freedom that would go along with a figure being on a ball joint. So you can, like I said, rotate the head all the way around, up and down, and you can also rock it back and forth as well. Still no articulation in the mouth. At the very least, again, if they had just given us a face plate with a closed mouth portrait, that would have worked, I feel, as well. Not a full-out straight head. I can't imagine that they would have actually tooled and released a secondary full sculpted head. But even if they had just done a face plate where you could, again, pop that off and put that back on. The arms do hinge out. You want to be, again, careful of this. Two things working really against you. One is the plastic, the tightness of the joint, and these little snake slithering pieces of plastic coming down on our shoulders. You don't want to bring those arms too far up for the risk that you're going to be breaking either the joint or you're going to be snapping this off in the process. Again, just a close-up look at even the detailing done to the torso. I mean, there's a lot to really check out on this particular figure. It's clever the way that they've done it, but just long-term is the concerns I have. Bend at the elbow. The elbow does have what seems like a double hinge on the elbow. You can actually even see, maybe you can see it right there. There's a hinge at the top of the forearm, or top or bottom of the elbow there. And there's also a hinge right at the top there as well. Technically, it does give you a double hinge. I've never really chanced the idea of bending the arm twice, for the risk, again, if something broke inside, it would be next to impossible to go in there and actually mend that. The upper torso doesn't have any waist articulation. It almost felt like it could be a separate piece, but again, because this is all what turns out to be actually all one layer, again, there's no waist articulation or anything like that. Again, you can kind of see how soft everything is for the body. Inside the body, it actually looks like there's almost just like a little narrow piece that's connecting the top of the torso to the rest of her body. Then for the legs do split out. The legs themselves are at least on independent ball joints, being that these are separate from the lower waist. So she does have articulation there. It's still limited, mind you, but you can still rotate the legs back and forth. I wouldn't get too crazy with those poses, though, for all the reasons that I mentioned before. And she does also have a double hinge on the knee. Again, not something I really experimented too much with. Last but certainly not least, Syl does have some mild articulation in the foot. Just be careful while you're doing that. And she doesn't have any articulation in the actual individual toes. So while she is a figure I feel is good to look at, it's certainly not a figure I feel like you want to be doing too much crazy stuff with, certainly when it comes to posing. And certainly when it does also come to the time to display this figure, I would probably recommend that you guys do pick yourself up a display stand for this, as she does have, like I said, some difficulty standing. She's only really holding herself by the backs of these little heel struts, and even if they're not on completely straight and leveled, it could cause the figure to completely topple over. Again, you can bring in the display stand that comes included with the figure, which I guess, at least for the sake of this review, allows the figure to stand upright. I don't really like personally displaying her with the stand because when it's all said and done, let me just slide the figure into place there. Like I said, it just not only does it increase the height of the figure towering past the view of the camera, but it doesn't also give her much flat footing to stand on. With a figure like this, the more flatter the footing, the better, so that this figure doesn't topple over and break as a result. Species Sill from ThreeZero is one of my favorite figures that I have in my collection. It's a strange blending of sci-fi horror, the Giger style that I liked so much with the Xenomorphs, mixed and interwoven with the Universal monsters. Gotta believe that it's not just coincidence that her head sculpt looks a lot like Bride of Frankenstein, and maybe that's why I like this figure so much. She has a real presence to her. Get the right light shining on her and you can see all the details underneath that seamless skin. Speaking of the seamless skin, you got to imagine what ThreeZero were going through, at least when it came to ideas circulating for the design of this particular figure. They could have gone easily the route, I feel, of an unseamless body. In other words, being able to see all the visible joints. The figure could have been comprised of all plastic, but I get that they wanted to do a more seamless look. It does look well and translates well to this 6-scale figure, but of course along with that goes the problems that seamless bodies tend to have. Normally, when you think seamless bodies, you tend to think of, say, the Hot Toys Wonder Woman, for example, and that's a different seamless body altogether. This one actually is closer to more like, I consider it more like a raincoat, the material that they've stretched over top of her skeleton body. It's clever the way they've done that, being that it's also that sort of murky, translucent plastic, that you can see all the skeletal limbs underneath of all that. Of course, the problem that does go along with it is being it's seamless, there's always the risk of splitting that plastic around those joints that are heavily used all the time. That's why when I do display Sill for myself, I tend not to keep the elbows in a permanent bend position, nor do I do the exact same with the legs. The legs I usually just keep straight, or have one further back like I'm doing right now, and the elbows I have, or the arms I have, at least completely relaxed. I don't like to keep the elbows permanently bent, because I do feel when I do straighten out those arms, I'm going to see the thing that I would expect to see, probably a split around where that seam gap actually is. If you can care for this figure, she is one great looking figure to put on display. You do have to be, of course, careful of not putting her into two extremes of poses, because of course that risk is there of splitting that seamless plastic that they put over top. Of course, that and the fact that she does have fragile things to her, like the spikes sticking out from the back of her torso and those little strands of plastic that are slithering out from her arms, legs, and the sides of her shoulders. Those are all things you want to be careful of when you are displaying the figure, which is one disappointing thing about this figure. Not so much that she didn't have a lot of accessories to go for, she doesn't really have any, but the one thing that she did come included with was an overly textured display stand. I feel was too high first for the figure, because it makes her tower over all the other ones in my collection, but I feel like also the base, as I mentioned in this review, being it's so textured, doesn't give her enough flat footing to stand the figure onto. As a result, though, for the time being, I'm displaying her with this display stand, but I'm thinking I'm going to be in the market soon of trying to find an alternative to this. Maybe get a customized stand that has the species logo on it, where it's completely flat and there's more stability, at least, of displaying the figure on top of. For the time being, it will certainly serve its purpose, and at least she does have those supporting backs to her heels. If it wasn't for that, the figure would be falling over most definitely. Now, did you manage to pick up this figure for yourself? I know, understanding that she is a little harder to come by now. I believe at the time that she was released by ThreeZero, she was at a very affordable price of around $230, I believe, to $240. ThreeZero, to their credit, when they do release their 6-scale figures, they always release them at an affordable price, with a lot of their figures being under the $200 price point. Still, I believe, was a little bit higher than that. But if you did manage to pick up this figure, boy oh boy, does she ever look great on a display shelf. But let me know down below in the comments section what you guys think of the ThreeZero Species Sill. Do you think it's a nice looking figure? What do you guys think of the seamless body? Also let me know down below in the comments section. If you guys are new to this channel, digging the content that's produced on a regular basis, round the clock it seems, then might I recommend that you hit that subscribe button down below, turn the bell notification on, and stay tuned because there's going to be a lot of videos coming your way. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.